Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining this Monday morning. This is, of course, another webinar on the series of basically us, the Hellenic American Union, presenting the different parts of the ECC and the ACP. And of course, there will be lots more webinars following this one here, talking about the BCCE, the ABLE, and the ALSE exams as well. So we have, let's say, a few more days of webinars that you can, join if indeed you would like to do so. Remember that all these webinars are also recorded and they will be available on YouTube for a few more days, let's say, so that everyone will have a chance to, I suppose, have a quick look, especially in the parts that they're interested in. And then we will, of course, prepare new webinars again with some more information, lots of different insights and new things that we will need to communicate to you. So, well, thank you very much once again for joining. Remember that on this platform, you'll have a chance to ask questions as well. There is a chat function on Zoom. You can see that, I suppose, if I just send a message here. Okay, good morning. So there you go, guys. This is where you can send your questions. I will be keeping an eye on the chat. I'll keep that open here on the corner of my screen. So if there are any questions that I can answer while I'm through the course of this presentation, of course, I will try to do so. If not, well, then you can always reach the academic department of the Hellenic American Union. If you just visit the website, hau.gr, there is a function there to send a brief message, or of course you can call us. If you call us, you will speak with one member of our team, and of course that person will be able to answer all your questions and even provide you with pieces of advice, even materials. Remember that every single sample test and all the different materials that we show you here today and through the series of webinars are available on hau.gr under supplementary materials. You will find there lots of samples from essays that the university shared with us, and some also very useful manuals about the different parts, different sections of the tests. But of course, today's session is about the ECCE listening and reading, these two parts of the exam. Lots of common elements, let's say, between these two parts, especially in the long form, the texts for the reading, and of course, the monologues, the talks in the listening part that you can also treat as a reading exercise when you're revisiting, I suppose, certain parts of the listening test. And we will have a closer look here today together to see, how we can help our students perform as best as they can. So indeed, preparing students for the ECC listening and reading tests. And let's start. Of course, we here at the Hellenic American Union, we've been organizing examinations since the previous century, since 1957, actually. We've started with the ECPE. Of course, today we administer lots of different exams for many different levels and skills. And also what it should be, and it is a very important part of the Hellenic American Union, is the cultural aspect of this organization. If indeed you visit the website, you will find that there are lots of events organized, throughout let's say the week. And I think there's some really exciting news if indeed you visit hau.gr. You might find things that you would like to, if you want to learn something new, if you want to attend, let's say, a session and on anything that matters, I suppose today. I'm sure the Hellenic American Union will be offering it in our premises there in Athens. So thank you very much for indeed joining this webinar once more. I'm sure you found all the information you needed on the website, and that's the place where you need to look for information, events, and all the things that matter. So, of course, the exam, the ECCE examination is a B2 level exam, and this is being developed. It's actually developed by the University of Michigan, one of the top academic institutions and research institutions in the United States, for a very long history, of course, in language testing since the 1950s, in collaboration with the Cambridge Assessment, Cambridge University Press and Assessment, University of Cambridge. These two universities, they work together to create these B2 level examination, for your students. And this is very, very important. This means that when your students will be successful and they will receive their certificate, they can use it for the rest of their lives. There's no expiry date. And of course, the whole point is this, that they can produce that particular certificate, and this will help them, of course, in for whatever purpose they need to show to prove that indeed they are at the B2 level users of the English language for work, for studies, whatever really their purpose is. Very, very important indeed. Two of the world's top universities working together to create the exam that we'll have a closer look here today together. Now, the listening is not, of course, the very first part of the written exam. As you know, the examination begins, the written part of the exam begins with a writing, and this is something that we've talked about in previous webinars. However, it's the second part of the written exam and comprises of two different, very distinct parts, the listening. The first one is something that you are quite familiar with, as of course, before you were even teachers. I'm sure you have a very good look at the ECCE and what new it actually brought into language testing. So the first part of the listening is that part with the pictures that the test takers are listening to a recording, and they need, of course, to choose the picture that is most appropriate, most appropriately answers a question heard at the end of, let's say, that brief recording. The second part is the part with the talks. Test takers will be listening to four long talks. Well, no, probably about a minute and a half to 2 minutes, talking about with one speaker, talking about really one very specific subject. And we'll have a closer look in a moment. Part one is indeed heard once. So the test takers will listen to those very brief recordings once, but part two, the part with the monologues, with the talks, they will listen to that part twice. So a couple of times, and of course they will have preparation time to well, to really read the questions and to familiarize themselves with the images when we're talking about part one of the different pictures, very simple pictures. But of course, there will be time provided for the students to get a good look at the information and hopefully guess what kind of information they will be listening in that recording. And this actually approach, being able to guess what the recording will be about, especially in part one, might be quite useful for them to find the right answers. There will be 45 questions in total, of course, and the duration is approximately 45 minutes for the listening part, because, of course, those talks will be played twice. So is there a safe score when we're talking about the listening part? Yes. Well, for the most part, if test takers have 30, let's say, correct answers out of 45, that's really a safe score, something that will help them pass this particular section of the test. But remember, for the ECC and the ECP, what matters is, of course, the overall score. So even if, let's say, we are slightly unlucky with one section of the examination, if indeed we do much better in the remaining parts, then we have every chance to be successful in our participation in this examination. Now, looking at part one, we will look much closer at part two, of course, in the reading a little bit later. But, well, we'll begin with what the test takers begin with, which is, of course, the very first part and the part with the pictures. 25 questions, the duration of this particular part is approximately 17 minutes. So they will listen to 25 questions, and of course, they will have time to preview the pictures. And this is all about some short, very brief conversations between a man and a woman. And they're not actually talking to us, the listeners. They are, of course, talking to each other, but somehow we're present, and that's why, we can listen to what they're saying. Maybe we are, let's say, in the same space. There will be three options, so they have three options, and there's always one correct answer out of those three options. And of course, there will be 12 seconds between the different questions. So there will be 12 seconds, excuse me, to give time to the test takers to mark their answers on the separate answer sheets. Of course, they're dark in a circle, and you will have a quick look at the sample of an answer sheet at the end of the listening section. And of course, they will also then turn to the next question, have a quick look at the pictures, and try to guess what the context, what the content even of that very brief discussion will be all about. So 12 seconds between the questions for the test takers to mark their answers on the separate answer sheets, and of course, to have a look at the next question. It looks like this. It's always something that I'm sure you've seen before. It's quite familiar to all students preparing for high stakes examinations. Um, it looks like this. We've got basically, sorry about that. Let's see. We've got three pictures, and of course, uh, in the course of those, let's say, 12 seconds, they'll have the time to look at those pictures carefully, try to guess what's actually happening in these pictures. Maybe this might be a little bit more difficult, but they will definitely be able to guess certain bits of vocabulary. So if they know how to call, let's say, a bus or a train, or we got a hiker, someone who's walking, so this will be easier for them to actually look for this kind of information, listen for this kind of information in the recording. I'm not really sure if I can actually play the recording, and hopefully you can hear the recording. So let me just try this. Uh, uh, no, just a moment, please. So we will listen to an example here just to have a look, a close listen. Well, let's press play. I guess that's what I need to do. So let's listen to this sample before, we get to the particulars. Okay, everyone. I don't think you heard the recording. I was afraid this will happen. Okay. Mhm. You missed the bus train. You can guess, I suppose, what the content will be. If you can create, let's say, your own script, but this will not be very helpful in the actual test. So make sure, if you're a test taker, you listen carefully to the recording. Try to guess, but make sure to base your answers on the actual recording, yeah, on the information shared. Okay. And for those who are indeed interested in, I suppose, acting and making up stories and scripts, there is a very interesting event coming at the Hellenic American Union this January. I mean, I think this is also on the front page of our website, so make sure to check this out. I'm sure you'll find this very, very interesting if indeed you are into acting and writing and so on. Absolutely. In the creative arts, let's say. Okay, so doesn't matter. We will see, I have more scripts so I can read them out loud since I cannot really find why this does not work at this moment. What the test takers will look at, of course, are a set of three pictures, and chances are that they will listen to information about all these pictures. Every single picture will be mentioned in the recording, but of course, there's only one correct answer. The one choice, let's say, that answers the question at the end of the recording. We will see examples in a moment, and we won't have to listen to, uh, to basically to make any kind of adjustments here. So let's move a little bit further, and we could get back to the script, of course, in a moment. So how can we prepare our students for part one? Well, looking at the pictures, of course, they will need to predict the conversation content. I suppose we see a man walking, there's a bus, there's a train, someone is going somewhere. You can just make, those guesses just looking at those pictures. But what's also quite important is that we should predict words that they may hear. So understanding, what the different vocabulary items are depicted on those pictures will help them very much follow, let's say, the recording once they start listening. And of course, what is also important is to spot similarities and differences, when we're looking at these pictures. For example, just looking at this set of pictures here, what do you think the conversation will be about? And this is, of course, something that we can do with the students if we sense that we have any kind of weaknesses, finding the correct, let's say, answers while we listen. It's always a great idea to prepare our students for a particular listening test just by looking at the pictures together and the preparation, of course, for this examination and try to help them generate the right kind of vocabulary and ideas about different questions. In this way, they will feel that they are moving on much, let's say, they can make much safer, let's say, guesses and choices. So looking at this, of course, it's all about the weather, and hopefully the students will see that. If not, you can help them see that this might be a recording, a conversation about the weather. And of course, you will ask them to name, what they actually see in those pictures. Can they tell what the different elements are here, depicted here in those pictures? So they can come up with lots of information, and hopefully this will make it much easier. Everything will be much more familiar once they start listening to that conversation in the test. So we can always go, at least, just use it for the page. Every page has 5 different questions, if you remember, from those practice books. So if you just look at, let's say, just one page and 5 different, let's say, set of pictures, and do this, I'm sure this will help them understand how they can proceed, on their own later. So always at the very beginning, when we're preparing for this test, make sure to introduce the actual task, the listening task, and help the test takers generate the right kind of ideas, the vocabulary. And of course, if they've got great imagination, why not? If they can express that in English, that would be, of course, great. So indeed, you see different sets of pictures. Again, which words do you think that the speakers will use? And of course, there will always be items that are quite familiar, to the test takers: laptop, computers, cables, bags, and so on. So looking at the pictures and thinking about what's going to happen there, what's the context, what's probably the story, and of course, what kind of words the speakers will be using. And also, as we said before, spotting any kind of similarities and differences. So we've got different sources of light. Again, test takers, the students, can come up with the right kind of vocabulary and the right kind of ideas, and even, their own, I suppose, scenario in this case. Of course, they will always look at the pictures first before they listen to the recording. And being able to, well, recognize main ideas here, the context, let's say, of a discussion and the different items, what are I suppose, the right kind of vocabulary will help them listen much more, attentively, and hopefully uh, catch the information that they need to talk about. So of course, they look at the pictures, they listen carefully, but to answer that question and get all the points, they need to pay attention to the question at the end of the conversation. As you will see in another example, well, in the first example that I'll show you here today, um, uh, all these different pictures will somehow, what the content of the three different pictures will somehow be, included in that recording. They will mention, let's say, the first picture, the second picture, the third picture, but of course, there's only one correct answer. And the correct answer is the one that answers the question at the end of the conversation. So we have another example here. This is something that the students will also hear in the actual examination. This is the, let's say, the sample that is provided. So during the test. So we listen to this one. A woman says, I want to learn to play a musical instrument, but I can't decide if I want to play the piano or something smaller that I can carry places, like the trumpet, says the woman. So right from the very beginning, we, of course, they were, the speaker, the woman, mentioned both the piano and the trumpet already. And then a man says, oh, I think you should play the trumpet. I heard it's easier to learn. For those who play the trumpet, it's quite a difficult instrument. And then the woman says, but I really enjoy the music a piano makes. I think I'll do that. So, very clearly, she expresses, let's say, her preference. And then the man says, or you could try to learn both if you have time. Okay, so even the third picture is also mentioned in that particular recording. But what matters is, of course, the question, which instrument does she want to play? So there's, of course, only one answer, and we've heard that answer. She very clearly stated which instrument she wants to play, but I really enjoy the music a piano makes. I think I'll do that. So the woman already expressed her preference. And of course, the first, picture A is the one that answers this particular question. But what we see here in this example is that we've got, let's say, three pictures. The content of those pictures is mentioned in the recording. And sometimes, of course, the speakers will mention, let's say, one picture, the content of one picture last. But what matters is what answers the question. So if indeed they listen carefully to the recording, they're focused, of course, on the task at hand, and then they also pay attention to the question at the end, then it's much easier to avoid, let's say, any kind of making any kind of mistakes. I'm sure just by, let's say, crossing out an option, and they can do that. Remember that in the booklet that they have in front of them with the questions, the actual test booklet, they can make any notes they like. They're using a pencil for all parts of the exam. So if this will help them just to cross out a picture and just pay attention, to what's left and make a much more informed choice, they can do that. So we expect the test takers to listen basically information about all three pictures, but of course there's only one that's the correct one, and the one that answers the question they hear last best. This is what really matters. Of course, once they do that, and they'll choose hopefully the right answer, they'll mark it on the answer document, on the answer sheet, and then they'll move on to the next set of pictures, and of course, they will repeat the same steps. So basically, just go back to those pictures, look at them, try to guess the content, try to generate some relevant vocabulary for these pictures, and then they will basically listen to the recording. Now, of course, there's another part in this test. We've got the 20 more questions, well, four different talks. This lasts a little bit longer. The test takers are able to listen to those recordings twice. And of course, there will be only one speaker providing some, let's say, details or instructions or some kind of information. Maybe they're presenting something very briefly, and the test takers will need to answer, let's say, five questions after each talk. All those questions are read aloud, so the test takers will, of course, have the chance to hopefully think a little bit in much more detail, their answers before they answer. They have some time basically to think about the different options. There will be four options now, in this case, not three, but four answer choices, and there's always one that's the correct one. Again, there will be a 12-second pause between the questions and after the end of each talk. So there's plenty of time for them to read the questions, the options A, B, C, and D provided below those questions, and of course, to mark their answers on the separate answer sheet. Remember that they can take notes in this particular part of the exam on their booklet, and of course, again, they can cross out, let's say, bits of information that they are they think that they absolutely certain they are not the correct choice. Again, we will look at this a little bit differently here now today. We will also treat this part of the listening as a reading exercise. Usually what we should do when we sense any kind of, let's say, difficulty, kind of weaknesses from our students finding the correct answers for this particular part, we can treat this the second part of listening as a reading exercise as well. Just with every test book that you have, I'm sure you got the script at the end of the book, the script for every talk. So you can revisit, you can go back to the actual script, but this time you will be reading it. You're not actually listening to it, and you try to treat this script as a reading exercise. So you will have the questions open on the one side, and of course the text, and you will also help your students spot the answers as a reading exercise. That would be, quite useful and will help them understand how information is shared in a recording and, of course, in any written text. I have a sample here. I have depict, let's say, hopefully in a easy to understand way, how information is shared in the recording, just by looking closely at a script that I've brought for you here today. But before we do that, let's have a quick look at this slide. Useful tips indeed. So the information heard in the recording and the information asked through its question follow the same order in the recording. In other words, information about the very first question will be found at the beginning of the recording. Then this will be followed with information for the second question and so on. And of course, sometimes there is a question at the end that applies, let's say, to well, the whole of the recording, the main idea of the particular recording. If we've got, let's say, a question with a loudspeaker, which is usually the last question, again, when you see the loudspeaker, the test takers will listen to a particular part, let's say, of the recording once more. So their attention will be directed to a very specific part of the recording in order to answer a question. The words and phrases in the questions and options provided might be paraphrased in the recording. And this is usually what happens, actually, even with reading exercises. So students at this level, at the B2 level, they need to be able to, well, to understand, let's say, how a particular bit of information is paraphrased, to be able to understand and find synonyms in the questions, and of course, in the recording as well, in the script. It's important that, of course, they can take notes if indeed they find this useful. But before they start listening, especially during the day of the test, they need to make sure that they are on the right page, that they've got everything in front of them. They've got the answer document on the side, and of course, they know exactly which questions they need to answer. Very, very important. Then they will look at the orientation statement. This is something that we also find in the reading section. There's a little sentence there that gives us some general information about the content that follows. In this case, listen to an advertisement on the radio. It gives us, the general picture. This will be an advertisement. Someone will be advertising a service, a product. They're trying to sell something. They'll use, very specific language to do that. Or maybe listen to a tour guide talking about a particular museum. Again, just by reading this very brief orientation statement at the beginning of the question, let's say in the booklet, the beginning of at the top, let's say, of the reading and the listening sections, will help the test takers again understand a little bit better about what they're listening. So if there's a tour guide, of course, some information about a particular place will follow. So I need to pay attention to that. If there is someone who's trying to sell something, then at some point, maybe the price of a product or a service will be mentioned. Maybe, the different features of that product, the characteristics. So there's always things that we can hopefully, talk about with our students when we're preparing them for part two, that we can talk about in the classroom before, they start listening to that recording proper. So orientation statement, quite important, especially for you when you are hopefully carrying out these tests in the classroom to help the students, generate some ideas about the general picture. Of course, they will also have a 25-second pause before they listen to the recording. This is an instruction that they will hear. So the person in the recording, the narrator, will say, you have some time to look at the questions. And of course, they will do that. They will have 25 seconds to look at the questions. Try to read the questions carefully. Try to teach your students to read those questions carefully, to find the keywords in those questions. What kind of information is being asked in its question? Are there any keywords that they need to underline so that they can glance and always pay attention while they're listening? And of course, just by reading the questions and of course the orientation statement, I'm sure it will be much clearer to them what the content of the talk will be about, whether that be about a tour guide or a salesman or someone who's providing, information about a historic event, for example. So this is what it looks like. We've got some space for notes. We've got the questions. And of course, we've got the orientation statement as well. Just looking at its question, you can understand what you can expect to hear about a particular issue, a matter, topic in the talk. Remember that the questions follow the order that the information is presented in the recording. So if indeed they do not, let's say they miss a question, they cannot find, let's say, the detail that they were listening for, then they will have to move on to the next question. Of course, to have more chances to spot the right kind of answers in that recording. Remember that this part will be played twice. So even if they've missed, let's say, they miss a question, they will have another chance, of course, to listen much more carefully. And now, being already familiar with the content and the context and the speaker will be much easier, hopefully, to find the correct answer. Again, as an exercise, when we are preparing our students, let's look at those questions. We're talking a little bit about the orientation statement and what we expect to hear, and then we can approach the different questions one by one. So, for example, how much do we know before we even listen just by looking at a question? And of course, they will do that automatically, but it's always important to help them, get into the routine, let's say, a very particular routine when they attempt to answer questions. So how often will the show be in town? That's where we get a question. That's what the question is about. And then, of course, we get twice a year, the frequency, I suppose, every Saturday, every year, one time only. So just by looking at the question, and of course they will do that automatically on their own, but with your help when they're preparing, we should get into that, let's say, way of thinking. Yes, we understand there will be a show in town, and I need to listen carefully and understand how many times the show will be in town. So we're listening for very specific information. So there will be a show. That's a given. This is something that we take for granted, of course. But I need to listen carefully now and understand how many times. Will it be twice a year, every Saturday, just just one time only show, whatever it is. When you know what kind of information you're listening for, we know the listening goal. Let's say it becomes much easier for the test takers to spot the right answer, to spot the information when this is shared with them in the recording. And even if they miss it, let's say the first time round, then of course they will have another chance to listen again more carefully, and then this will help them hopefully choose the right answer. So being able to, when you know exactly what kind of information you're listening for, is it like a date? Is it a name? Is it a price? Is it a place? Is it a particular object that someone needs to bring with them when they go on a school trip? Whatever it is, when you know what you're listening for, then it becomes apparent in that recording, and especially when you have, let's say, a couple of chances to find the right answer. So it's important that every test taker approaches those questions with as much understanding as possible, as much, let's say, insight as possible, just looking at the question, underlining the keywords, knowing what exactly we're listening for. And of course, the options below can help us, get a good idea of what exactly we're listening for. Then this becomes much easier, a much easier task to, of course, find the right question. Plus, we've got another chance, of course, to make sure that indeed we've chosen the right question. And this is a very brief, let's say, example. We're not going to read that, of course, but what I want to show you is that, yes, this is the script that we're talking about. And of course, you can see that all the questions, the information, the answers to those questions are provided in the order, in the same order in the script. So for example, we've got question 26, that's the answer we're looking for, 27, 28, 29. And this way, test takers, hopefully, even if for some reason they miss a question, they have, many more chances to find, let's say, the rhythm and keep following the recording and find the right answers for the questions that follow. At least, let's say, the first time. The second time will be hopefully much easier. So the students need to look at its question and the answer choices, but especially the questions at the very beginning. Listen carefully, of course, cross out the wrong choices while they're listening and mark maybe an answer that they're perhaps not 100% sure about. And of course, listen carefully once more. I have some more examples here that I think you'll find quite useful. Of course, remember that they don't need to mark their answers after they listen for the first time the recording, but only once they listen the second time the recording, and of course, information is much more concrete to them. So look at this. We've got let's say a sample of questions. At the beginning, let's say at the very top of those questions, they will have the orientation statement. We mentioned that this is very important, especially when you're preparing your students for the listening, let's say, test. So in the classroom, you can talk about, let's say, the questions and the content of that talk before they listen, to prepare them, to teach them, let's say, some strategies that will help them choose the right kind of information there in that recording. Then you can go and try to, let's say, provide some further details about its specific question. So for example, for question 36, we're listening for very specific information. Then we're listening for details for the next question. Then we have to guess, let's say, from the context, what the answer will be in the third question, what will happen next, perhaps, something that is implied by the speakers. Again, more specific information. And of course, listening to a part of the recording once again, because we need to hopefully understand what the speaker means. So we've got very specific, let's say, information being asked in its particular question. And if the students can recognize that, they can see that, they underline the keywords, then it's much easier for them to spot the information they're recording because they know what they're listening for. And look at a script. We'll, as I said before, if we go back and we revisit a particular part of the listening, we can treat this as a reading exercise. So we look at the script. This is the script of the advertisement on the radio we've talked about, and we get three paragraphs. Of course, a listener cannot see the paragraphs, but they can understand when there are, certain pauses, let's say in the delivery. And this particular script uh, is properly ordered. There will be introduction to the main idea of the talk at the very beginning, where the speaker will try to make sure that the listeners understand what this talk is about. And of course, they will choose certain cohesive devices to connect, let's say, different bits of information and to signal to the listeners that now we're progressing on to the next question. The speakers in those recordings will always provide, let's say, some kind of a clue, a signal to the listeners to help them understand that now we're moving away from question 36, and I'm basically talking about question 37. They need to be able to understand structure, of course, the test takers, in order to follow, let's say, the train of thought of the speakers and how they present the different bits of information. And it's all about structure. What we see here is indeed about different structure. So then introduction to the main idea of the talk, then information about past and future activities related, of course, to that topic. And at the very end, some further details, and of course, a very nice conclusion that will also provide some details. So being able to understand structure and how ideas are, let's say, presented to the listeners or to readers when we're talking about reading texts will help test takers find their way, within, let's say, those scripts, within those texts, and hopefully find the right answers much more easily. Certain keywords that introduce ideas or contrast ideas or conclude, let's say, main ideas will be quite useful for them to be able to follow the order of the information as it is presented in the talk. And of course, looking at the questions, as I said before, yes, we've got always the questions are answered in the same order. So information about question 36 is right there at the very beginning. Then 37 follows, 38 and 39. Usually the last question is something about, let's say, the main idea of that text. So information is indeed presented in that fashion. But also, what's also important is that sometimes for the reading and the listening, we need to be able to understand when a certain idea is presented by using particular, let's say, synonyms. So being able to understand when some kind of information is paraphrased in the recording will help us find the right question. In this way, for this matter, we read the first question, very quickly. What does the speaker say about well-known local artists? And we got a few choices there. The correct answer is B. They supplied some art for free. And they supplied some art for free basically is donations to support the program by several well-known local artists will also be up for auction. So you see, we've got that information, that particular information, but of course, using a synonym instead of the exact same word. It's also important. Let's have another example. What does the speaker say about the money raised this year? So we're looking for something here in the question. And of course, we get an answer. Next, the profits from this year's show will go towards bringing in professional artists and so on. Uh, what does the speaker suggest by mentioning Pablo Picasso? Some of the students could become famous. You might discover the next Pablo Picasso or Frida Kahlo next. And of course, how can buyers see the art before the day of the event? Uh, well, to preview some of the amazing art ahead of time, follow the link. So if students have a look at the script and you provide the analysis for them, especially for those talks that they find a little bit more that they found a little bit more challenging. Hopefully, this will help them understand a little bit better how they're listening for specific words and details and synonyms and paraphrased information in the recording, and will help them, of course, get the right answers with a bit of practice much more easily. And of course, the last question, what does the speaker imply when she says something? Well, what does it say? Are you looking for a beautiful art that won't cost a fortune? So the art will be inexpensive at this particular event because it won't cost a fortune. If you're looking for this kind of art, well, that's the place you should visit. So indeed, looking at the questions, the keywords in those questions, and of course, looking at the script, if indeed your students encountered any kind of difficulties, would be great to boost their confidence and to show them exactly that the information is already there. They just have to listen for it, pay more attention, to the language and how the speakers share information. This is what the listening section answer sheet looks like. Okay, it looks like this. It's quite familiar. And of course, between the pauses of those questions, between the pauses and the questions, the test takers will need to mark the correct answers on their answer sheet. So this doesn't have to fill those circles with a pencil. Of course, if they make mistakes, they can erase, but it's important that they only mark one answer for each question. This is very important. Otherwise, they will lose marks, for really no reason. One question, and of course, one answer always. I don't know if you have any questions about of course, they can mark their answers in their booklet while they're listening, but they will have to have all those answers recorded on the answer sheet at the end of the listening test because they cannot go back, let's say, to the listening section once we move on to the reading section in the examination. And of course, there are instructions on how they can mark their answers. But of course, the examiners will be there to guide them, to let them know that they need to darken circles. And if the examiners spot that the test taker has two questions marked for one question, they will intervene and help them understand that they only need to mark one, one answer. Now, I know that we've spent some time for the listening bit, but let's talk about the reading as well. And there will be some time at the end to answer questions, for those who would like to stay a little bit longer. So remember that for the listening test, there is no time to transfer questions at the end. They will need to mark their answers while they're listening. So between the pauses and those questions, instead of only circling, let's say, the right answer in their booklet, they will also need, or they should only actually mark their answers on the separate answer sheet. Now, for the reading, we've got a familiar format once again. We have those gapped sentences. We got grammar questions, vocabulary questions, and of course, the reading comprehension questions based on two different tasks. And again, you will see so many similarities between the listening and the reading in a few moments. There will be a total number of 65 questions that the test takers will need to answer. So we got 15 grammar questions that will test some very familiar, let's say, grammar structures that students have been practicing and been using and, of course, encountering during the course of learning English, really. There will be, of course, vocabulary questions, slightly fewer, 14 questions for vocabulary. But remember that all vocabulary questions, or lots of vocabulary questions, also found their way in the reading section of the exam, so that the test takers are provided with more context to choose, let's say, the right answer about the meaning of a particular word. So vocabulary questions are now, they will encounter more, let's say, vocabulary questions in the reading section as well than in the past. Reading task one, it's all about single texts, and of course, 6 questions for each text. And then we've got multiple texts on a common, let's say, theme that again they need to answer some questions there. You will see that it's quite guided, let's say, reading task 2 and task 1 as well. So 65 questions in total, and of course, 1 hour and 15 minutes, so 75 minutes in total to answer 65 questions. What's a safe score for this particular part? Well, it's anything from 43 correct answers and above is should be a safe score, will help the test takers pass that particular section of the exam. So anything higher than that, of course, would be a great score for your students when you're preparing them for the test. So grammar, a very familiar format. A gap, a sentence, and of course, 4 different choices. What the test takers need to do is read that particular sentence, of course, and choose the right answer, following their intuition, maybe their instinct. That would work, absolutely. But also, hopefully, if they can recognize some grammatical structures, then they can make the right choice. A choice that completes, let's say, the meaning of a particular sentence in the best way possible, in a way that it makes sense. When they read it again, they can understand what this particular sentence is all about. There will be a few clues here and there to choose the correct answer. I mean, it's not only about them looking for familiar grammatical structures. Of course, if they are aware of how certain prepositions are used and auxiliary verbs and so on, this will indeed help them make, an informed choice once more and choose the right answer. In this case, we've got a conditional. Of course, they've been practicing on conditionals during the grammar, let's say, class, quite a lot. So I'm sure this kind of grammar structures, hopefully, will be quite familiar, and they will help them choose the right kind of choice. But also, they need to be able to understand what's the meaning of the different parts of speech. Are they looking for a verb, a noun, an adjective? What is it? An adverb? If indeed they can also guess what really completes that particular sentence and not, uh, let's say, it does not dilute, let's say, the meaning in any way or cause any kind of confusion. If indeed they are aware of even certain collocations, that would hopefully help them choose the right answer, once more in grammar. Maybe this is their favorite part. So I'm sure they've been taught all these different grammar structures and they encounter them in the test. Then they can always choose, let's say, an option that makes sense. And this is what matters. We need to make sure that when the sentence is complete, it makes sense to the reader and, of course, to the test taker. If we just have to look for clues, sometimes we cannot, let's say, recognize a particular grammar structure. But if we know that a particular sentence takes, I suppose, place in the past, then, of course, we need to make the choice that really completes, let's say, that particular sentence. Every single, let's say, verb here is placed in a past tense, for example, and this is what makes sense. For vocabulary, again, we just have to guess. We have to eliminate, hopefully, as many answer choices as possible and make, let's say, a guess that it's much closer to the correct answer. We are given, of course, clues in that particular, in every single sentence, but sometimes we might be unable, let's say, to make the connection or to find the right collocations. Again, just by eliminating different options, this will help us relate particular items of vocabulary to certain nouns in the sentence, and hopefully the choice again will complete that sentence with the meaning left intact. Of course, looking for familiar collocations, this is also key, and of course, this is something that they will carry with them for the C1 and C2 level exams, because collocations are very, very important for students when they answer questions like this in vocabulary, but also when they are producing their own answers in the writing part. Absolutely make sure that your students understand that there are certain pairs of words that are used in a particular fashion. They follow certain patterns because this will help them feel much more confident when they are writing their ideas on a piece of paper, if they know that two certain words, they are a perfect match and the meaning is always what I'm intending, let's say, to share, that would be great. There are lots of websites online, well, dictionaries that I think they're called collocation dictionaries. So you teach your students, especially at the as they prepare for higher levels, to look up words in those dictionaries, to do a little bit of research when they're practicing, when they're writing. You get a wealth of information from those collocation dictionaries, and it will help you also in the class to teach, let's say, much more effectively. So indeed, we earn a degree. That's the expression. If they're aware of expressions, absolutely, this will be the choice. Otherwise, they will have to guess. They will have to eliminate, let's say, options. And hopefully, if they are between a couple of choices, they will choose the correct one. Also, read, let's say, the whole sentence and just guess the missing words, the missing words uh, before you even see the options. Of course, they will see the options. It takes like maybe a second or two to go through all four options. But if indeed they can guess what exactly is missing from that particular gap, hopefully they will find it in the options below. If they cannot find it in the options below, then maybe a synonym will be provided in the options and in the answer choices. And of course, that will also be the correct answer. Uh, so trying to guess what exactly is missing, find it, make sure that it's provided in the options. If it's not there, maybe we're looking for a synonym of that particular word. And if you can spot a synonym, then that will be, of course, the correct answer. So lots of different ways, let's say, to approach even, these very brief sentences. And this will take us to the reading part of the exam. It looks like this, a short text and 6 questions that they can find next to it. And of course, they have 4, let's say, answer choices for each of these questions. As you will remember from the listening bit, there is an orientation statement. It's present here as well in these, let's say, texts. So students will need to read the orientation statement again to get an idea, a very general idea about the content of that particular passage. And of course, when you're preparing your students for this particular part of the examination, it's a great idea, as we said, if we mentioned before, to talk a little bit about this passage about lobsters. What is this? Do you know anything about lobsters? What do you think this text will be about? What kind of information will be presented, perhaps? So make sure, to keep the conversation going in the classroom as you're preparing your students for the tests, because they need to understand how to approach these tasks. And of course, once we talk a little bit about what we might find in that particular passage, then they need to read the whole passage and focus on the main idea. So then we got the answer. We read the whole text and we get the answer about what this text is all about. And if we do that successfully, effectively, then of course we can also answer the very first question. What is the main purpose of the passage? Well, you've read the passage and hopefully, you can understand what the main purpose is, what the writers wanted to present. Then you will start reading carefully, once again, that particular text. You've got time, so make sure the test takers read the text as many times as they find it necessary. So we can even understand a little bit better about how the authors want to organize, how they structure, as we talked previously, their content. It's important to be able to tell how the different authors structure their content and how they present different ideas, how they contain different ideas, different bits of content in separate paragraphs. Maybe they can, while they're practicing, of course, write next to those paragraphs the main, let's say, idea of that particular paragraph. It's exactly the same. We teach our students to create paragraphs in their writing responses and to always start with the orientation statement. But even if they don't do that, we always instruct them to contain a single idea in its paragraph so that it makes sense to the people who read it and they can follow, let's say, our reasoning. So this is true about, of course, the reading text as well. There are paragraphs for a reason, there is structure for a reason, and of course, every single paragraph presents a very particular idea. And if we write it, let's say, on the margin, then it might become easier for us to spot, let's say, the right bit of information that we're looking for to answer a question on the uh, side of the passage. So again, we can do that as an exercise, writing the main idea of its paragraph, and then of course we'll go back to those questions. We'll basically go and have a closer look at those questions. We will have to answer those questions in the order they, we see them, at least, at the very beginning. Because as it was the case with the listening, this is also, very, very similar. You will need to answer the questions, or the questions will, for the most part, will be answered in the same order that the information is presented in the passage. So I think I have a better slide. Yes, look at this. We've got, let's say, the first question, question 75, which is all about the main purpose of the text, the main idea. And then if you indeed attempt to answer the questions in the order they appear, this is absolutely a great, let's say, strategy. So you get information about the second question at the very beginning of the text. That's the one in, let's say, the pinkish color. Then for the third question follows after that. Then the fourth, of course, there might be a question that asks for the test takers to synthesize bits of information, but this will not be, let's say, the majority of the questions, in the reading tasks. What you see here is what usually is the case with those passages. So if they have this in mind, if just this picture, if they make a mental picture of this particular, let's say, slide, then this will help them find their way in the actual exam when they're trying to find the answers in the text to answer those questions. So this will hopefully limit much, let's say, searching in the text if you've got an idea that the information is presented for the most part in the same order that it appears. Also, they need to understand what's the difference between, well, line and sentence. This is something that examiners, they hear this question, they are asked about this many times in the course of a test, but of course they cannot explain that because that would be unfair for other test takers who are perhaps also uh, uh, do not cannot make, let's say, they don't remember the difference. But listen to this. In the fifth sentence of paragraph 2, what does it refer to? The problem is not with it here, but in the fifth sentence of paragraph 2. It's important for the test takers to understand the difference between line and sentence, and that, of course, a sentence can extend many lines, but a line is a line. And of course, in the actual test, they also have numbers. Let's say, every 5 or so lines, there's a number to help the test takers, well, spot, let's say, the right line much more, much more quickly. So in the fifth sentence, so yes, what's the difference between line and sentence? Very important. I know that everyone knows this difference here, but sometimes, and of course under stress, this might be a little bit trickier. And these kind of questions are always part of the reading text. So make sure that your students can tell and they can understand what the difference is between line and sentence. This will hopefully, give them a correct answer, extra points in the test. And of course, they will have to be able to relate, to look at the keywords in those questions, look for signals to relate the question to the correct paragraph. Yes, we, for the most part, know where exactly the answer might be, perhaps at the very beginning of the text, but there are more clues in those questions that will help us spot the answer. Where on lobsters does something appear? Where? So that's, of course, a keyword. And looking closely at the text, we can see the answer. The answer is provided. It's right there, all over, from their claws to their tails. So we've got a couple of answers here, huh? A couple of clues. It's all over, their bodies of lobsters, and then from their claws to their tails, slightly, a little bit more, some additional information to help, of course, the test takers understand that we're talking about, the body of that particular, of a lobster. So looking for signals, looking for keywords in those questions, underlining those keywords, and then of course the test takers have a very clear idea what exactly they're looking for, what kind of information they're looking for, and they will scan the text to locate that information, and hopefully this will help them answer the question indeed. Reconsider choices. Make sure that your students can understand where are some, let's say, options provided that are there to confuse somehow, to make it a little bit more difficult, more challenging to the test takers to choose the right answer. Reconsider choices which lift words directly from the text. You see, we were looking for the all over the body of a lobster from their claws to their tails. So we've got an answer here on the entire body. That's A, option A for question 76. But there's also an echo kind of let's say, option here, only on the clause. Many times, test takers might choose this one, answer C, because, well, they see the exact same word, clause in the answer choice, and of course, clause in the text, in the passage. This might be the correct, let's say, choice. Very rarely, this is the correct choice. Usually, when there the options lift words from the text, they do that for just one reason, really to make it a little bit more challenging for the test takers to hopefully, help them read much more carefully the passage and find the answers there. So this is also another, let's say, trick in a way that it's used in tests to make it a little more challenging for the test takers to find the right answer. And find a reference or the meaning of a word by checking the context. Remember, the vocabulary questions will be there, will be part, let's say, of the reading section. And of course, luckily for the test takers, now they've got a whole paragraph, a whole text. They've got the context there to help them guess what the meaning of its word is. So indeed, uh, uh, spotting the right sentence in the fifth sentence of paragraph 2. So spotting the paragraph and then the sentence. What does it refer to? And of course, they'll have to look for that particular word in as they are instructed by the question, and then try to understand what the reference is all about. So being able to do that, to spot the right kind of information, of course, they can also find the meaning. It's right there in the text, provided there's no, let's say, guessing involved. The same is true, the same kind of strategies and approaches for answering, let's say, the right questions can be also applied in the second text, in task 2 of the reading test here, where the test takers will be reading a number of sets of related texts on a common theme, of course. Again, the questions will have 4 different options, and they will be very particular, let's say, text types, advertisements, job notices, articles, and so on. And first, questions assess the understanding of each text individually. So they will be instructed and be directed to a particular text to read and find the answers. And then the final questions will refer to 2 or more texts. Again, remember they share, let's say, a similar theme. So they will have again to combine, to synthesize information in order to answer those questions. So, for example, we'll see this is the format. There's always an instruction that tells the test takers where to look for the answers. So Indeed, we've got this. The following question refers to section A. So, of course, the test takers will be drawn to directed to section A. It's a very brief text. All texts are quite brief. They will read that and hopefully, write, let's say, the question. So, read the question, and spot, of course, the passage, find the answer in the specific passage, and of course, then mark it and move on. Mark it on your answer document and move on to the next question. Now, it's also quite important before you start answering the questions, and maybe students do that. I'm sure they have the different, let's say, routines here, but I would suggest that it's better for the students to scan the set of texts and get the main idea. Just by, reading quickly all four passages here, they can understand what the main idea, what's connecting, let's say, these four different texts. And then they will start with the questions, as they're instructed. Question number one, read its text, and then read its text, very carefully as they progress. But first they scan to get the main idea. What's what exactly is presented here from lots of different, I suppose, perspectives. And of course, they can read the text more than once to answer the final questions. Well, they will need to synthesize, information. So this is indeed what happens. We are directed to a particular text, and of course, for the final, let's say, questions, they will have to go back and reread bits and passages here to find the right answer. Remember, make sure that your students remember that information could be located even in the titles of those passages. That's why they're there for. They're provided for a reason, to help them understand what the main idea is and to provide some further details. And of course, even looking at the pictures can help them find the right answer. So every bit of information that is added here on that particular page with the four different passages is there for a reason, to help the test takers understand what they're reading, what it's about, and hopefully, provide some clues for answers. So again, we're approaching its, let's say, task using the same strategies for task one, following the order that the questions are presented, looking for clues and keywords in those questions, and of course synonyms and paraphrasing in the passages themselves. And of course, we always avoid, let's say, options that they appear, let's say, too easy to be the correct answer. Avoid options that seem to lift words from the text. This is usually not, let's say, not the right choice. Well, there are some, of course, global strategies that I'm sure your students are aware of. They need to be able to manage their time effectively when they're answering the questions in the grammar, vocabulary, and reading. It doesn't matter if they want to start, let's say, with a reading. We see that this happens, quite often. Students know that it will take them much less time, let's say, to answer vocabulary and grammar questions. So they instead begin answering, begin reading, let's say, the reading part of the exam first in the reading section. And they will have 75 minutes, of course, to answer all questions. They should not spend too much time on any one item. Of course, it will take the bulk of that time, of those 75 minutes, will be spent on the reading section of the test, because they need to go back and reread certain parts of those passages to make sure they've got the right answer. But again, they should be practicing. They should know how much time, let's say, they need to devote for the reading section and how much time they will need to answer, let's say, 14 or 15 questions in grammar and vocabulary. They should not spend too much time on any one item. Just follow their intuition. I'm sure they've crossed out a couple of options. So if they are, let's say, between a couple of correct answers, possible answers, they'll have to obviously make a choice. They should not ever, let's say, leave any answers, multiple choice answers, of course, unanswered. They need to choose, let's say, choose one answer that they think it's much closer, let's say, hopefully, to a mark for them. Indeed, they can do that by eliminating as many options as possible. If they see that something is definitely not correct, they can just cross it out using their pencils in their booklets, and of course, then working with whatever answers are left. Hopefully, this will narrow, let's say, the opportunities, the correct answers, the number of correct answers, options, and they will choose the appropriate one. So, indeed, this is what it looks like. That's the answer document. So, of course, once they've finished answering all the questions in the GVR, if they just have to look at that particular document that will be in front of them, and if they spot that they've got any questions without a choice there, without a recorded choice, they just have to mark one, even if they just have to follow their intuition. Remember, they can take notes in the booklet, in the exam booklet. They can use their pencils, they can cross out, they can make notes. They can even, uh, I suppose, different ways to underline particular parts in the passages that will help them find the right answer. They can use that a booklet in any way they like, in any way that will help them hopefully get to the right answers. But of course, at the end of those 75 minutes, they will have to have all their answers recorded on that separate answer sheet right here on the GVR side of it. So all the answers need to be recorded here because this is what matters. Those booklets will go straight to recycling. So what really matters is that they've got all their answers on the separate answer sheet, when the time ends. And of course, the staff will pick up, the relevant documents, and they will check that everything is in order before, they dismiss the test takers. We talked about a little bit about practice and about scripts and how we can use scripts to help our students familiarize themselves with the way that information is structured and is shared by the speakers and by the authors. And you can find that in the, let's say, very last pages of those books. So we've got 3 different publications here for you with 8 tests. The ECCE practice examinations 1, 2, and 3, and of course we also have the companion books that will help the students revise vocabulary, much more easily with some extra with some extra exercises. So you got plenty of materials. You got the sample tests, you got the books, the publications, you got the companions for the students to study vocabulary and to practice vocabulary as well, and to see lots of I suppose useful information that will help them retain that knowledge, retain that vocabulary, retain those words, and hopefully use them creatively in the exam as well. There is no time provided, just to answer that question, to transfer answers onto the answer document. They'll have to do that during the time of the actual test. So in those 75 minutes that they've got for the GVR, at the end of those 75 minutes, they will have to have all those answers already recorded on their answer sheet. So it's better for them once they've got an answer, or maybe they finish a section of the GVR, to also copy those answers on the separate answer sheet. This is, very, very, very important. Okay, make sure that they've got all those answers there before the time ends, basically. So 3 publications. The difficulty, the level of those books is exactly the same as the one that we've got that they will encounter in the real tests. So, well, it's great if they indeed practice, and of course use these books, this practice books, as we've discussed here today. Go back to the script and try to provide feedback and underline keywords and explain why particular options might not be the correct ones. And of course, do try to generate ideas and vocabulary, because in the classroom, treat this, let's say, as a teaching session with your students, not just a simple test, and make sure that your students do, let's say, use the correct time to answer those questions? Can they actually, go to the school and perhaps, have a test there instead of home? Because you need to make sure that they answer all those questions in the 75 minutes provided. If they need more time, then of course you can work with your students to hopefully, get to a certain point where when where time is not an issue. They can answer all the questions in those 75 minutes with a certain ease. And of course, they will have some time to go back and review some questions that they found, much more challenging, much more difficult. All right, everyone. Thank you very much for being here today. It's been a bit of a longish, let's say, session. Make sure if you got any questions about anything to let us know. You can call us, you can drop us a line. And of course, we'll see you in the next one. In a couple of days, we will have the ECCE Reading, Listening and Reading webinar. So make sure, to tune in for that at the same time, at 10 o'clock in the morning. I'll stay a little bit longer to answer some questions that I haven't answered. But for everyone else, well, have a great rest of the week. Thank you very much for being here once more. Thank you, guys. And good luck, of course, with your students, with the preparation of your students. I'm sure they will be, great. They will ace the test. Thank you very much, everyone. Let me just go back for those who stay a little bit longer to see if we've got any questions that we haven't answered. Okay, very, very quickly. Uh, he missed the bus. The training would take too long. Okay. Uh, all right. Of course, they always make a guess. I mean, they should not leave any questions without an answer. They just have to guess. Choose the one, talking about listening now, but basically all questions, just choose the one answer that they feel is probably, the correct one. There are more, let's say, chances that this is the correct answer. Uh, Absolutely instruct them to practice numbers, times, dates. Yes, indeed. If there are clocks, there might be clocks in those pictures for sure. And this is something that they might encounter in the speaking tests as well in the future. Prices, numbers, uh, dates, and so on. Of course, looking at the pictures, indeed. So they will have 25 seconds for each talk of part two to preview the questions. Then they will listen to the recording, and then there will be, let's say, that 12-second pause between the questions when the narrator reads the questions to give them time to mark their answers on the separate answer sheet. And of course, to go back to the booklet and read the next one. They can mark their answers in the test booklet. And this is, I mean, not against the rules, but remember, I'm talking about listening here, well, both parts, they need to have their answers recorded on that separate answer sheet before the time ends. The test takers will not be given any extra time to transfer answers. So they will have to have all their answers recorded on the answer sheets before the time ends. They will not be given any extra time to transfer answers at the end of the test. This is not part, let's say, of the test. So yes, they can mark their answers there, but they need to make sure they copy those answers straight onto the answer document um, uh, because they don't want to hand, let's say, over an answer document without the answers marked on it. This is what matters. The university only has access to the answer sheet. They will not see the booklet because the booklets will go straight to the for recycling. Very, very important. So they can make any notes in their booklet, whatever they like, whatever will help them find the right answer. So there is no extra time provided to transfer answers. Why so common to use talk about animals in passages? I guess because this is something that students at this age are quite interested, about animals, and they've got lots of information that they can share with the test takers that it's easy to follow and to understand. Um, I'm afraid I cannot send you the notes, but of course you can take some screenshots of what I've presented. And remember that this recording will be available on YouTube for a few more days. So maybe you can revisit different parts that you would like to be reminded of any kind of information. So there's no extra time provided to transfer answers. Test takers will need to copy their answers on the separate answer sheet while they're listening and while they're reading, let's say the answering the questions in the GVR section. The books are basically the same as far as difficulty or the level is concerned. So you can start with the first one and then, of course, progress the second to the third, or you can start with the third one, whichever one you like. The level is the B2 level. It's exactly the same. Are there note-taking strategies recommended for part two of the listening? If this actually will help them? Um, Depends. If they take notes, of course, they can write down some very specific bits of information. But on the other hand, if they are preoccupied taken notes, the right kind of notes, in the booklet because they are afraid that someone will read that, but no one will read that. This will be recycled. Then, of course, it does help to be reminded of something. Maybe they can take a note about which question, let's say, to pay extra attention to, because it wasn't very clear when they first heard the recording what was the right answer. So, they can make a note, and when they listen for the second time, they can, of course, pay attention to that particular part so that they can spot the right answer. It really, there are different approaches here. Some test takers want to take notes because this will help them find the right answer, will help them understand better the information shared. But others pre prefer to concentrate on listening and reading at the same time rather than listening, reading, and writing. So it's really up to the test taker. Different, let's say, different approaches. But of course, they will have to try your students while they're preparing both approaches and see what works better for them. It's the same as, we've got test takers who want to start with the reading passages rather than with grammar and vocabulary. Others, of course, they will start with the very first part because they feel that they can answer those questions much more quickly, and then this helps with their confidence, to move on to the reading part. It's really up to them how they would like to um, manage their time and how they would like to take notes, if they want to take notes or not. Are there any listening section instructions during the exams? Well, exactly what you see in those books, written, let's say, before the questions. This is exactly what the test takers will listen. Of course, you can also download the sample, the official sample by the University of Michigan. This also contains instructions for the listening part, and this is exactly what the recording contains. There are no further instructions. All those instructions are already there provided in the recording. Of course, the examiners do explain a few things before they start. For example, make sure to mark all your answers on the separate answer sheet and so on. So they always provide, let's say, some further examples, but what they need is already there in that recording. Students should bring with them in the exam center their IDs, of course, a bottle of water, pencils, an eraser. That's it, really. Yeah, some great ideas, hopefully. Well, everyone, thank you very much for being here today. That is the end of the session. Remember, if you want to reach us, you can call us, you can drop us a line. Of course, smartwatches and smartphones are not allowed in the examination room, as it's, I guess, they're not allowed in schools these days. So this is the same, of course, for this exam. So I'm sure you will receive an email and a message with all the necessary, let's say, instructions for the day of the exam that do not actually have to do with the test itself, but what you can bring during the day of the exam with you. But for the most part, yes, avoid smartphones and smartwatches. Do bring a bottle of water, your ID, and of course, pencils and an eraser. That would be great. You can also bring a ruler if you want to, let's say, keep track of the different questions so that you're not lost when you're attempting to answer them. This is also quite useful. All different books that we've got available for you are, of course, at the same level, the B2 level of the exam. And you got plenty of tests there to help your students practice and see how they progress and how, they score higher, every time they follow your feedback and every time they feel that, they familiarize themselves with what the exam is all about. And of course, they learn and they add new words in their vocabulary as well. Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great rest of the week, and we'll see you in the next one, guys.